Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm a director and producer at StoryKeep. And outside of my work at StoryKeep, I'm also a director and producer for documentary films. One of the most recent projects that I was lucky enough to work on with StoryKeep was a full-length feature film about a family's history and the origins of their family business. In addition to the feature film that we created, we also decided a really valuable addition to this project would be to create short video portraits that highlighted each elder and their own life philosophy. One of the moments that stood out to me the most was working with one of the elders where she was really able to get into a space to be able to reflect on the seasons of her own life and how those seasons shaped her values. And those values were not just passed down within her own family, but the larger family as a whole. I really think that the space that we were able to create within that process was a way for her to dig into memories and a past that we wouldn't have necessarily been able to capture in the larger film. So if this is interesting to you or a family you support, we'd love to hear from you.
Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this show. It is so wonderful to have you joining me here for this conversation. This is a place where we have uncommon conversations about things that matter deeply, the people we love, and the purpose that we give to our own lives and legacies. Our mission at StoryKeep is to capitalize on the power of story for profound good within families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, creating films and private podcasts that help a family navigate their shared narrative. Our work is designed to deepen connections. My conversations on this show centered around two questions. The first is, whose life story from your own family would you most want to see documented? And the second is, what are you, as a person and as a professional, hoping to create and leave behind? Today, I'm really honored to welcome Vincent Valeri. Vincent grew up in a family business, learning from the ground up. He knows firsthand the ups and the downs of working with family, what makes it rewarding, and also what makes it really tough sometimes. That's why he is passionate about helping families navigate the complexities of wealth, business, and relationships. With a Master's of Management degree, Vincent started his career consulting for some of North America's biggest companies. He then spent 5 years in wealth management for one of Canada's largest banks. That's where he saw a gap. Families were getting financial advice, but not the guidance that they needed to manage their relationships and shared vision. Now, as a trusted advisor and coach, Vincent works with families to create continuity strategies, resolve conflicts, and align values across generations. He's a sought-after speaker on wealth transition, family dynamics, and legacy. Today, Vincent is speaking about his dad, who was also named Vincent. His dad grew up extremely poor in a bombed-out village in Italy. His dad was orphaned at the age of 10 and later had great success in manufacturing circuit boards. Vincent talks about the lessons both in life and in business that his dad taught him at an early age, as well as how some of his personal frustrations inspired his current life purpose. All right, let's settle in for this conversation with Vincent Valeri as we explore the enduring influence of his dad and the legacy that he himself is building. Vincent, it's so lovely to sit down with you and have this conversation. And I am just utterly delighted to spend some time on this very day talking about your dad and your relationship with him and also your work. So first of all, tell us about why today is important to you and your dad.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. The world works in mysterious ways, as we know. So today is actually the 2-year anniversary of my dad passing.
Mm-hmm.
I know when you and I started to prep for this StoryKeep time that you do, and you shared the date with me, I said, wow, I couldn't think of a better way and to honor him, his story, then sharing it with you and others on your podcast. So yeah, today's 2 years to the day that my father passed away. So it's
Mm.
February 7th, 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a special day. Yeah.
I'm really glad that we get the chance to do this on this
Yeah.
momentous day.
Yeah.
Um,
It feels right. Weirdly, it feels right to be speaking to you about him today.
and why is that? Is it because enough time has passed, like, and that you've had a little reflection of his importance to you or thinking about it differently?
Yeah, yes. And he wouldn't want people to be sad. He wasn't that type of character. It's part of his story about moving forward. For me, it's just a continuation of the story. It feels right. I don't know. I don't know. I can't, it's almost, I can't explain it. I have a weird, eerie sense of calm, partly because of you, Jamie. And I think just who you are and the work that you do. It just feels good to be talking about him today. Of all the days of the
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
yeah, it's a great opportunity. So I thank you again.
Well, I have to say I was really impressed, for lack of a better word, by his story and basically how that story has evolved in you and your work that you do now. So, your dad was born in Italy
Yep.
and grew up, under pretty difficult circumstances. Can you tell us his name,
Yeah.
and what that was like where he grew up?
So his name, even that's a bit of a story as the Europeans came over to the New World. Vincenzo Valeri, as they would pronounce in Italy,
Lovely.
affectionately Vince Valeri in Canada. So dad was born, January 27th, 1944, just as, the World War, I guess, depending on who you ask, World War II kind of sort of ended, I think 1945, I think. But so he was born right in kind of the middle tail end of that unfortunate disaster that the world faced at that time. So January 27th, 1944, in a little village in Abruzzo. The province specifically is called L'Aquila. And at that time, like a lot of Europe, it was under bombardment. His village was taken over by the Germans at that time. Italy, if we remember history, was on the wrong side of the conversation at that time. And so dad was born to hard times, not only impoverished,
Yeah.
not much happening in Europe besides the war. And, we talked about this during our prep calls. A lot of things happened at that time. And dad was no different. Orphaned at 10. His mom died, unfortunately, very young from a health related issue. And like a lot of men or people at that time, he never got to meet his dad. And there's different stories about that. And I think one of the things that I don't think regrets, but one of the things that I did miss with him was talking more about his childhood growing up in this village. It was something that he didn't speak about. It was like almost a no-go zone for him. But as the story goes, at least how I've been told, is that he didn't know who his dad was. So then his older brother, my uncle, Luigi, who had about a 7-year age gap, really raised him. Yeah, so he grew up in this town. There's a dirty word for it in Italian that means without father, which I won't say on this
With
on the podcast. So he really became a kid of the village, and I've had a lot of opportunity because of him and the business that he subsequently built in Canada to go back to the town. He gave back a lot financially to the village, so I was able to hear stories and meet people. And then when he married my mom, she was also from that same town, but they met in Canada. They came to Canada at two very different times. Yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating the way the world works. My mom came over in 1951 on a boat with my grandparents, her parents, and they landed in Halifax. It's like a Canadiana type story and made their way into where we live now in Hamilton. So she came over as a 2-year-old, my mom, a little girl. So grew up as much as you can. And it was an Italian family, very Canadian, went through the Canadian educational system, very Canadian. Lost, didn't have an accent, spoke beautiful Italian, but very Canadian, my mom. My dad came over at 22, 23, depending on which story, depending on when you officially land, I guess, very Italian. And they had met in Hamilton at an Italian dance. There's obviously a big Italian community up here in Canada. And my mom's parents, my grandparents, we affectionately call nonna and nonno, Side note, my nonna is still alive today, and she's 101 years old. Incredible. So my grandparents remembered my dad growing up in the village
As this village kid.
as this village kid.
They remembered him.
They remembered him.
How wild is that?
Wild. So my dad really formed a deep bond with my mother's parents. My parents divorced when I was very young, but still that bond continued. And as being part of both of them, both sides of the family, moms and dads, I found that remarkable that despite the challenges mom and dad had in their marriage, they still allow is not the right word, but there was still room for that relationship for my dad and my mom's parents because of that lineage to the village. So it's fascinating.
I can imagine also that your dad not knowing his dad and then losing his mom early, then to have these parental figures from his own village connect,
Absolutely.
it must have meant something beyond words to him.
Beyond words. And I'm very close today still with my grandmother. I think that was probably the toughest conversation I had to have. Now I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
When I had to tell her, because part of my role with dad was he was in business. I worked for him for a long time. I had the honor, even though it's not easy, of being his executor. When he passed, I got the pleasure of working through his estate. But the hardest conversation I had was telling her, my nonna, that dad wasn't doing well and wasn't going to make it. That was terrible. To see a 99-year-old woman, my grandmother, cry the way she cried that day was difficult. But yeah, he was a great guy. He did a lot for us, for me, for the community.
Let's talk about, because he ended up making it, pretty big, right?
Yeah, he did. Financially, yeah.
Yeah, financially. And so he comes over when he's 22. He's
Yeah.
has a thick Italian accent. I speak
Very tough.
English.
Yeah.
And talk to us about the business that he built. I mean, these are the things that assumedly you would want to have documented
Yeah.
had you taken the opportunity to document
yeah.
his story.
Yeah. That in itself is fascinating. So at the time in Italy, because of the World War, after the war ended, there was all these rules, right? So his older brother, as I mentioned earlier, Luigi, 7 years older, learned a trade, chemical engineering trade to manufacture circuit boards, computer chips. And back when in Italy at that time, when you turned 16, I believe 17, you had to go serve time in the army. So after that was done, you had to be invited to the big city. So my uncle Luigi had a job at a military company in Rome, manufacturing these computer chips, these products, telecommunications, etc. So my uncle actually invited my dad to work with him in this company, which is why they remained so close. In that role, dad was a quick learner. I laugh. Hopefully I inherited a little bit of his smarts, but he was very good linguistically. So he had a real ear for language. So he picked up English very quickly. So in that role at 22, 23, 24, this company in Rome sent him to the US to attend a conference because he could speak English. And it was in that trip, in that adventure, where the opportunity was identified in Canada that we lacked this manufacturing capability. So my dad, being the guy that he is, went,
Ding dong.
that's ding dong, right? Came to Canada. Like I mentioned earlier, met my mom. She was the breadwinner at the time. She was gainfully employed at one of our big banks up here in Canada. And my dad, it's like an American immigrant story. My dad was dead set against not working in the traditional Canadian industry. At the time was steel, especially where we are in Southern Ontario. He wasn't having it. So with the blessing and the support of my mom, he started this company in 1974. So about 10 years after being in Canada, having these contacts in Italy and making some contacts in the US, started this little company. And from there, it was, he would say, yes, there was hard work. Yes, we knew what we were doing. And we were very, very lucky that if you remember in the 80s and 90s, technology in North America just skyrocketed. And my dad, in his little manufacturing fabrication shop, rode that wave too in the 80s and 90s, and was ultimately partnered. Ironically, this is the way the world works. A German family, interestingly enough, bought majority of my dad's company in 1988 or 89. My dad stayed on as a minority partner, but ran the operations in Canada with a German partner. So it was really, it's just the story. There's just all these wonderful little avenues that, because of the business we went through it, but because of that company, I was afforded maybe too much at a young age, of the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to see business and participate in some really interesting conversations at a young age. But then it also gave me, a bit of a silver spoon at that time. Part of this is why I do the work I do today. But I think Dad, because of his upbringing, impoverished is being polite. When he did make it or start to earn some real money in Canada, like most parents, you want to give your kids everything you didn't have when you were growing up. And in my case, I think he went a little too far. I really had a good time. Looking back now with my wisdom of 45 years old, yeah, he really materialistically, all the bells and whistles with cars and travel.
He wanted to give you everything he hadn't had.
Yeah, yeah. And at the time it was great, right? And then the story changes. Like the technology sector in North America really changed in 2000, 2001. So my dad was at the young age of 61, 62. The market was changing dramatically. He was changing. So he made a decision to sell the company in 2006. What that did for me, it really threw me off course, because growing up, there was a path laid. You're going to work in the company. You're going to follow in Dad's footsteps. Dad had very different intentions. He was done. In his mind, he came, he conquered, I guess, in his mind. And at the young age of 65, he said, I'm done. He sold his remaining shares and relaxed. And it wasn't only until that time, after the sale of the company, that he and I became even closer, if you can imagine, as people, as father and son. I really got to experience him as a guy, not Dad, the businessman,
The boss.
just Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful that he had the foresight to actually sell the company when he did, not only from a financial perspective, but from a relational perspective. It really allowed us to be father and son. And I got to spend 15 really, really good years with my dad and getting to know the man, Vince, as I'm his namesake, and not just this power broker in business.
Yeah. Now, if you had had the opportunity to document his story, which you didn't, right? I mean, you didn't record him in any way.
No.
What would be the questions that you would want to ask him now with hindsight?
What kept you going? He had this drive to keep going. I really wished I would have asked him those, like, what motivated you? What was your why? Like, why were you doing this? I think the easy answer is, well, because for the family. But as you know, Jamie, there's an internal driver in these entrepreneurs. I would have loved to have talked more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the risk that they took on, Mom and Dad, with the start of the company. What was that like? And I think it was a missed opportunity to learn that. It's interesting because when he sold the company, it was almost like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's talk about something different. Yeah, I think that's for sure one. I think I would have loved to have known more about some of the mistakes is probably the wrong word, but some of the decisions that he made in life.
Lessons learned.
Lessons learned. That's a great lessons learned. And I got some dadisms. I got some things downloaded to me, but really we missed an opportunity to really sit and talk about that life journey. And again, I thank you for this opportunity. Is me documenting it as best as I can, his story. But yeah, I think that's one of them. I was like, what kept you going? Like, what really got you up in the morning to do what you did?
And I would imagine also looking maybe back, and I know you said he was very reticent to speak about his childhood, and he was sort of like, we're not going there. But what would you have wanted to ask him, like just for him to describe what his childhood was like and this sort of bombed out village, what Abruzzo looked like?
Yes, for sure. I think it's more so after I had my boys. He would make comments with me, "You're so patient with your kids. Like, you're so,"
Who would say that to you?
to me, it was so, and I would spend, I'm jumping a bit, but as you know, with these business owners, you have to make decisions, and it's decisions around time. So am I going to give time to the business, or am I going to give time to the family? And in a lot of these guys' cases, my dad included, he gave more time to the business
Yeah.
than he did to the family. I've kind of reversed that. I really try to balance my life between family, obviously with my beautiful wife, Angela, but my two boys in particular. But I would love to have known more about dad, especially in those teenage years, right? And not just him, it's him and his friends. Because we would go back a lot to the town and they had this group of guys that all grew up together in this challenging environment. And dad wasn't the only one from the town, but dad got out and came to the new world and made it and would go back and celebrate that. What that meant for dad to have the ability to go back to somewhere with some really challenging times and be able to give back to the village. When he passed, the town did a full parade for him. The band came and a real, because of what he gave back to the village.
Financially and sort of being very generous there. Yeah.
Very generous there. And always going back and we talked about, you can see that hat behind me.
Yeah, can you pull it up and show it to us?
I can. Yeah. This is the Alpini. So this is a military group in Italy that my nonno on my mom's side was a part of. And the Alpini is for the Alps. So this particular group were mountaineers. They would climb the mountains and do all that work in the Alps in Italy. Dad did a 2-year stint in the military, never fought in a war, thankfully. But because of the work and the dedication back to the community, they made him an honorary Alpini, which for my dad was it was a big deal. And then at his celebration of life here, it was really cute, actually. You have all these really senior men in their 80s and 90s marching in with the Italian flag and their Alpini hats and giving a military salute to my dad. One of the things I'm most proud of, Jamie, is how he passed. I know that sounds a little crazy, but he passed with, 12 of us around him, family and friends, peacefully, despite being very sick. And then we flipped the script a bit in terms of the funeral arrangements. We really made it a celebration. I didn't want to make it morbid. People that knew dad, he was a really big character, loved to cook, loved to have functions. So I tried to emulate that in his celebration of life. So there was music and speeches, and it was a really
And did you have certain food that he loved to cook there?
we did that. Great question. So my dad loved we call it porchetta, which is basically pig. Right? Yeah. And yeah, so everybody had their porchetta sandwich and a cold beer. My dad also inherited this obsession. He's obsessed with soccer, or in Italy they call calcio. He also was a co-founder of a big soccer club here in Hamilton, an old timers club. So they were all there, and it was a traditional Valeri barbecue. There was barbecue, there was paninis, there was beers,
Beautiful.
obviously some wine. It was beautiful. It was. Yeah.
So, speaking of libations, you had told a beautiful story earlier that you and your dad in 1994 went to the World Cup.
We did. Yeah.
So talk about the liquids that were shared there.
Yeah. He has a deep love for soccer, and I inherited it. My boys have inherited it. So in 1994, the world, dad went to a few World Cups. He was there. He was there in 86 and I think in Mexico, and then 1990 in Italy. He took me as a kid. I remember going to Italy in 1990. Never got to go to any games. But in 94, I was 15 and it was in the US. And fortunately for dad, one of our big suppliers is based out of New York, and they knew my dad was obsessed with soccer. So they actually gave us their box seats at Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands. And I got to see all of Italy's round robin games in New York with my dad and a lot of his friends too. My uncle here from Hamilton also came. But one game in particular that I'll never forget was the semifinals. So Italy versus Bulgaria. At the time, there was this famous player named Roberto Baggio, and he scored 2 goals. And it was hot. It was summer in New York. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And we were in this beautiful box, very corporate box, which Dad did not like at all. So he would try to open up the windows, and the other people would be like, close the windows. And he'd be like,
Vincent, come on.
we're at a soccer game, right?
Yeah.
So at one point, we realized that the actual Prince of Bulgaria was sitting out in front of us.
A prince. There he is. Yes.
And we're winning the game too. So Italy's up. And my dad, you can see from me, we like to have fun and poke the bear as we can. And so Dad did just that. He actually opened the windows, kept them open. Finally, we let, some of our American friends let in the heat. And he started to tease the prince. Hey, Prince, look at the score. And then at one point, we're drinking these really cold bottles of water. And he actually offered the prince a bottle of water, which he took and accepted. And I remember he looked at me and said, it was the first time he kind of let his guard down. And obviously Italy's winning, so he's emotional. It's a big deal for these guys to see their country going to a World Cup final. And with tears in his eyes, he said, not bad for a kid from Abruzzo. It really landed. Here we are sitting at center field in Giant Stadium, watching his country go to a World Cup final. And he's there sharing that with me, right? And it was like, wow. I'm so grateful for those opportunities that he and I got to experience that together. And these are the things that, you reminisce about and laugh about and celebrate. And that was my dad to a T. It was just, he was gregarious, he loved to have fun, was not shy. It was a wonderful day. We actually, as a quick aside note, security was very high that day, obviously, because it's the World Cup and there's delegations from countries and the Prince of Bulgaria is there. But Dad also was so generous, not only with his money, but his time. So we had 4 tickets to this box. And he said to me, but there was, say, 10 of our friends scattered around the stadium. And he put me on a mission at 14 years old. He used to affectionately call me Junior. And he said to me, Junior, go and get, so-and-so and so-and-so and sneak them into the box with us so we can all enjoy the game together. So here I am at 14, 15, 94, with these 4 tickets. So you would have to go out, they would scan you out, and then I would go and get 3 of Dad's friends, scan them back in. And I did this 2 or 3 times. And that was Dad. Like, there was no rule that wasn't there to be bent, right? So,
Right.
sure enough, having 4 seats gifted to us, we had like 15 guys celebrating, and
You wanted everybody to enjoy.
everybody to enjoy always. Yeah. Hence the food aspect of his life too. He always wanted people to feel welcome. And I think food in particular, my sister inherited his passion for gardening. But this thing about food for Dad, because I think the way he grew up, food became a real identity for my dad. So like he would throw parties, business meetings were always done around food. Everything was food oriented. Always. There was always a meal with my dad around. Yeah.
That's so gorgeous. I'm wondering, as I'm thinking about this culminative moment, right? I mean, in a sense of your dad being there at the World Cup and sort of articulating to you and maybe to himself, like he had made it in a certain sense, right?
Yeah.
And that was the meaning for him and his life, and where he had come from. And now sort of turning to you and the work that you're doing and the legacy, big word that you're building. How do you conceive of that for yourself? Like what is, for him, that was, the top, right? What do you feel like is like sort of your driving why? You would ask him that if you had had the chance.
Yeah.
What would you say that is for you working with families, coaching them, helping families,
Yeah.
around continuity and aligning, around their values? Talk about that.
Yeah. Thank you. It's really to empower them to have more of these type of conversations, right? It's to empower the individuals and the families to really get clear on what do they want to do and why are they doing it. Because of my story, I was really all in on dad's story. And that's not sustainable. You have to walk your own path. Despite the financial success of dad selling the company, I was 28 when he sold it. I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do?
With your life?
What do I do with my life? I had a midlife crisis at 28. Ironically, when I met my wife, she met me at the lowest point. And then I start to see that with families, especially the rising gen, where they look up at mom and dad have built this enormous thing called business. And the younger generation, and I was part of it too, you get these really drastic behavioral things. You can be really entitled and spoiled like I was, where you feel like I'm waiting for this opportunity to take over this company. I'm not really applying myself to life because I have this thing called the family business that I'm just going to take over. And that doesn't serve. It doesn't serve you, the individual. It doesn't serve the business. And it doesn't serve the family. And on the other extreme, I see a lot of, again, my own experiences too, is this failure to launch, right? So because the families do have access and money and too much choice, I found that these rising gens get stunted. Like we call it the paradox of choice. I can do anything. So what do I do? And that's been my real driver professionally, wanting to help families really get clear. What are we doing with these assets? Why are we doing it? Because these families we work with really are one of the biggest drivers economically for our countries. There's all these statistics thrown around, like 60% of the world's GDP is driven by family-owned companies. So I sit back and I go, if they don't transition well, what is the ripple effect to the local community, to the national economy at large? If these companies that employ thousands of people donate the most to charities, contribute the most to taxes, if they don't continue well, what does that mean for the community at large? So that's like the business mission. Personally,
Personally,
my
yeah.
personal legacy with my boys is I really want to instill in them a sense of self-confidence that I lacked in my 20s because I was given everything, a real sense of self-confidence and the courage to make decisions for yourself. Maybe that sounds trivial.
Not at all. Not at all. How does that show up, Vincent? Like, how do you do that with your boys? What opportunities have been thrown in your face?
Yeah. Well, they're not getting a Porsche at 16 like I did. I can tell you that right now. It's difficult, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, these business owners have to make tough decisions. And one of those tough decisions, especially earlier on, is where am I going to focus my time? And in my case, a lot of our cases, the time was focused on building the company. So dad, he was around. It wasn't like he was an absent parent, but was he around? Like you could always see him thinking about other things. So how does that show up? If I'm presented opportunities that I know is going to really take me away from my boys or even my family, I'm really thoughtful about, is it worth it from a financial perspective, right? I'm blessed with a little bit of financial resources because of dad and the work that I do. We're very blessed, and my wife's family as well, that I'm able to be more thoughtful about where and how I want to spend my time. But I think with my boys too, it's not a simple yes all the time. You know, kids want their parents' time, and parents that can't give their kids time, they usually give them stuff, toys, cars, money. That was my experience. So I approach it a little bit differently. I'm like, here's the time. Let's go and do something. I really try to instill that. I really want them to know, like my mom was for me, when I came home at 4 o'clock from school, mom was always there, always. Not that I'm here every day, but I would say 90% of my time, the boys know where I'm at. And I really, really want that for them, that dad's around.
Can I ask you, because I think a lot of people relate to this, where, you're in your profession and like you said, your dad was there, but was he? He was thinking about other things.
Yeah.
Do you grapple with that? Like, what conversation do you have with yourself about that?
Yes, I've been so blessed to do this work for 15 years. And as you know, Jamie, everybody has a story, and some of those stories can be tough. So as best as I can, I really try to separate it and be present for the boys because you only have them for so long. I saw a beautiful post that you shared that you and your husband do every morning. You drop off your daughter. I think you have a
Yes.
daughter, and you guys talk and recording your. So I'm very aware of that because Dad and I didn't have that time as at that young age, like an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm all in.
You're all in. You're doing that. That's your priority.
It's my priority because at 13, 14, they're gone. They don't want to hang out with you anymore, right? I mean, I'm sure they do, but and you have to allow them that space to grow. So at least at this time frame where the boys are at 8 and 4, I'm very intentional about when it's family time
Mm-hmm.
because they don't really care what Dad does. They don't, not yet anyway, right?
That's like a revolution that is happening, and I mean revolution in the sense of revolving. It does feel like more and more parents, in their 30s, 40s, even 50s are looking at what happened there. Like, okay, our parents had to do XYZ or they chose to do
Yeah.
XYZ in the way that they were with me. And I want to do it differently in what I view as better, right? Of really being more present. And I think it seems like it is a rising theme, of consciousness, within
Yeah.
parents of this age.
Yeah. Well said.
But it's not easy, right?
It's not easy. You think about the immigrant story, right? So they come to the new world. A lot of this drive was based on a necessity. Like, I got to do this because I need to do this for the family. We're blessed with my necessity now is time. How do you prioritize your time? And at the end of the day, Dad gave me so many gifts, but him passing really was like, wow, what's important is the time you spend together because life is finite. Him passing has made me a better advisor and coach and dad. It's not lost on me. Like, I thank him daily because wow, I was so lucky to spend the time with him that I did at the end. Wish is probably the wrong word, but I'm now expediting that with my boys. I don't want to miss anything, any experiences that my boys have, because there was time. I remember playing ice hockey as a kid, and Dad couldn't make it, and Mom had to tie my skates, and her strength wasn't exactly that strong, and my skates weren't tied up that well, right?
Mm.
I remember as a little boy going, Dad should have been here to do that, right? Dad was at the factory. Again, you learn these lessons from our parents
Yeah.
of what's most important, what matters most. And for me, at this point in time, what matters most is prioritizing time. That's what I say to families too, especially families that are successful financially, right? It's like, okay, that comes with a whole set of questions and decisions and blessings and burdens. I'm not saying it's not easy to be part of a financial successful family. It affords a lot of opportunity and wonderful things, and it comes with challenges and questions. It's unique to that space.
Mm-hmm.
And because there is this financial resource, they can be more thoughtful about how are we allocating our time to what matters most. In my humble opinion, it's in relation.
Well, this might be key to this question that I have for you, or maybe it's another thing entirely. But what do you feel like has been the biggest personal progress that you've made in your lifetime, given that you grew up in a family business?
Patience. I think I've learned to be more patient and more calm. If some people that see this knew me growing up, there was very much an entitled mindset,
Impatient.
aggressive, impatient, arrogant,
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a jerk in my teens and early 20s. I think now my greatest progress, Jamie, it's a great question, is just being able to be patient and as best as I can, fully present with whoever's in front of me. And this empathy that I've developed, 15, 20 years of doing this work in different avenues, just understanding and respecting and being empathetic with other people's story. That for me has been a huge learning and progress because before I didn't really care. Right? It was like, you're me centered. I was very me centered. You see this a lot in successful families. To answer your question in this long way, it's really being able to sit back, take a deep breath, be reflective of my responses. I was very much in a reactive mode, and now I'm very much trying to be in a responding mode.
Mhm.
And this sense of calm that's come over me the last number of years, I think that's been a big personal achievement for myself.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, I experienced you that way. So, um, this is a question that could come off as more morbid.
Please. It's okay.
If you could write your own obituary, what would be the first 3 sentences or so? Basically, we have control over our legacy to a great degree. What would you hope that would be said about you?
Yeah. Hmm. I would hope it said an honest and loyal friend and husband. And, without sounding really cheesy, a devoting father. That for me is my priority. I'm very focused on my relationships, especially with Angela, my wife, and my boys, because of my experiences growing up in a divorced home. It's not exactly 3 sentences, but I think it's very much, I really pride myself on my word is my word. What you get from me is complete honesty and transparency. And I think there's a sense of loyalty that my dad showed, sometimes to his detriment, with the people around that I really, really value. So I think that would be something that at least start the obituary. And then the way I ended dad's obituary, my sister and I wrote it. I quoted Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. I think that's important for me too. I really want my life to be purposely driven and in my way. People that know me might laugh at that. And this is part of me wanting to empower my boys and families. Chart your own course. Walk your path. And I think that would be something I would want written in my obituary. He walked his own path. Yeah.
Well, Vincent, I hope that we stay in touch
Thank you, Jamie.
to the end of your time on this planet, such that
Yeah.
I can be a part of some wonderful parade.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamie.
I hope I outlive you and enjoying some porchetta for a chance. And I think you've done a really beautiful job of honoring your dad on the anniversary of his death.
Thank you. You have given me a real gift today, Jamie. So a big thank you to you. I couldn't think of a better way to honor him and think about him than sharing this 45 minutes with you and speaking about him and his story. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Who We Remember. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to subscribe. When you subscribe, a new episode will pop up automatically in your favorite listening platform every 2 weeks. You can see some great photos related to today's story, as well as find out more about our guests and their work. Just go to storykeep.com/podcast. Who We Remember is a production of StoryKeep. StoryKeep works with exceptional individuals and families to document their life stories and histories through films and private podcasts. You can learn more about our services at storykeep.com.